and produce 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And really, they're a focus point for bringing together all of the systems to do with emissions and climate change, whether it's transport, whether it's heat, whether it's industries and buildings and so on. And we're going to have a little bit of focus on buildings and real estate today. And they're important because they account for something like 33% of final energy demand. And the flip side of why cities is because cities are taking action. And we've seen that more than 1,000 have now committed to science-based targets and are part of the UN race to zero. And when you talk to the cities, there are some really inspiring activists that are part of the cities, focused on the technical change that's needed, and also engaging their communities in the right way to make sure there's a fair and just transition. And I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago with a US city leader who really summed up their advice as be bold, be quick, don't hesitate. So the second part of the equation is electrification. And that really is because the level of transformation needed in our energy system to achieve net zero, for those of us who worked in it a number of years, we kind of reflect on the fact that it's a truly epic change that we need to go through. And it is our current biggest source of greenhouse emissions. And there was a landmark report from the IEA back in May that talked about net zero by 2050. And that talked about the three main aspects of electrification in terms of what that's about. The three things we need to do. So one is generation needs to shift almost entirely to renewables. The second part, and this gets harder, is all about electrifying the parts of our energy system that are not already electrified. And this is where we think about transport, heat, industry, cooling, buildings, and so on. The third part of this will need much more electricity through our power system. And we're talking about a doubling of energy delivered through our power system. And in fact, the IEA talks about 50,000 terawatts by 2050. That is just an incomprehensible amount of energy. And coupled with that, to be able to do this, we also need to look at energy efficiency. So there's a whole number of systems changes happening within electrification that need to be enabled. And the third part of the equation is all about technology. And here I'm thinking about how can you enable and use technology to achieve different results that you could never have otherwise achieved. How can you do different things that you simply couldn't have done before? And it's in the mix as part of the enabler for change. And these are the aspects that we're going to explore in the panel today. And we're going to get on to what does that mean in terms of net zero acceleration. We're going to talk about the challenges, the potential solutions. I'm hoping we're going to talk a little bit about the ecosystems for collaboration, what they actually mean, what they are, and this idea of democratization and sharing value. So I'm really pleased to bring a really distinguished panel of speakers together today. We have on the line, we have Kira Appleby, who is from CDP. She's a global director of cities, states, and regions. She's coming to us from London. We can see you, Kira, fine. Can you see us? Hi, Kira. We've got Chris Lovett, who's the Chief Operating Officer for Energy Services from E.ON. Welcome, Chris. We got Thais Peterson from Copenhagen City. He's part of the Properties and Procurement Department, who's really driven the program around electrification on buildings. And Trygve Skjotskif, also from Copenhagen. He's from IBM, and he's our Europe leader for flexible energy. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the organization you come from and your role, and then we'll begin to explore the challenge and solutions and the lessons. And just so we get the technical stuff sorted right away, we're going to ask Kira to introduce yourself. Go ahead, Kira.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Phil, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so thank you. It's really great to be here. I'm Kira Appleby. I'm from CDP. CDP is a global NGO, and we provide the reporting platform for non-state actors in COP terms, but in real world terms, that's 14,000 companies. And in partnership with ICLEI, over 1,100 cities, states, and regions globally. And we've been collecting annual climate disclosure from companies for approximately 20 years and for city governments for the past 10 years. So as Phil said, I am the global director for cities, states, and regions. This last year, we had over 1,000 cities reporting in partnership with ICLEI, and all of our data is made freely available on our open data portal. So as we've heard a lot over the past 11 days, this has been the largest gathering of world leaders on British soil in recent history. And that to me underlines how there's been this really fundamental shift, even in the last 2 to 3 years, in how policymakers, and how businesses and how cities perceive and understand the issue of climate change. I think it's a really exciting time. And I'm really pleased to be joining such a great panel at this critical moment.
Thank you, Kira, and welcome. And let's next turn to Chris Lovett.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name's Chris Lovett from E.ON. I'm E.ON's Chief Operating Officer for our Energy Infrastructure Services business. And E.ON is the UK's largest 100% supplier of renewable energy. We've put a lot of investment in the past to building wind farms and renewable generation assets. But increasingly, we've moved our focus much more downstream to look at the customer and to look at decentralized renewable generation activities. So give you a bit of an idea of the scale of some of the things we're involved in. If you go back just over the last 10 years, we've put over 1.4 million energy efficiency measures into residential customers' homes. We install over 15,000 smart meters a week to help customers engage with their energy consumption. We're increasingly installing heat pumps into customers' homes. I think this year so far, we've put in about 500, which makes us one of the largest installers in the UK of heat pumps. And we're also putting more and more progressive technologies in, such as solar PV, batteries, EV charge points, not only into new build properties, but also increasingly into the retrofit environment as well. If I sort of step up a little bit from sort of individual residential homes, we're working very closely with a number of large cities in the UK, particularly the City of Bristol and Coventry, where we're in processes at the moment to help them decarbonise their cities for the future. We've worked with smaller city quarters and housing developers for many years now in the UK, so understand what it takes to operate at a reasonable scale. And we're also backed, being part of a large European group, by some of the experiences that my colleagues across Europe have had in working with cities such as Stockholm and Malmo, Berlin and Milan, where we've made a lot of progress at city level in helping them with a decarbonisation journey. And also we increasingly look at some of the city quarters and areas like airports as cities in their own right, and are very active in that space, again, helping with a decarbonisation agenda. So nice to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And next, introduce Thijs Petersen from Copenhagen City.
Thank you, Phil. So my name is Thijs Petersen, and I work with Copenhagen City Properties, Facility Management and Procurement. We are a city-owned property administrator, and we are charged with the overall ownership of all of the public buildings in Copenhagen. So this is schools and kindergartens, sports facilities, and so forth. In total, we own an area covering around 2.6 million square meters of floor space spread across 900 buildings. The overall aim for Copenhagen City Properties as a facility administrator and building owner is to provide reliable and cost-efficient facility management to the city's core tasks. I sit in the technical department, and it's a department that consists of 23 individuals with varying backgrounds, from engineers to technicians and BMS experts over academics and program developers as well. The role of this office is to create strategies for all of the technical installations in the city's buildings. So I think HVAC systems to fire alarms. Creating strategies for refurbishment, maintenance, and of course also how to upgrade energy efficiency measures in our buildings as well. So these are all tasks within this office that we've been working with a specific focus over the past 6 to 7 years, on specifically on energy efficiency and cost-efficient energy efficiency measures as well. We do a bit of international collaboration as well, as we believe some of the projects we've implemented that we have success with can can be replicated in other cities across the world as well, and in other cities in Denmark as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Thais. And finally, Trygve.
Thank you, Phil. So my name is Trygve. I work in IBM Consulting's environment, energy and utilities practice. We are a large group dedicated to sustainability and the electrification of our society. We work with governments, large corporations and utilities worldwide to support this important agenda that we are on the trajectory on. And we use our heritage within technologies, emerging technologies, to design new digital business models, design intelligent workflows and platforms that basically can support and accelerate some of these ambitious targets that we are facing. Personally, my passion is around engaging consumers in the transition of our electrification. I think there's a huge benefit, as Phil also pointed out in the beginning, of democratizing some of those roles that sits on few larger players, to help engage and spin that up from the bottom with the use of consumers, and that's some of the things we will discuss today, also from the perspective of E.ON and the City of Copenhagen and CDP, how that works together. So we are in a very exciting period, and I think that technologies that we're seeing around now is speeding up what we can actually do in a much faster pace than we have looked at earlier.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Now, I wanted to begin really just to kind of frame the whole problem and talk a bit about the broader resilience and adaptation in the context of a city. So I'm going to ask Kira the first question. You do a lot of work with the world's major cities on climate disclosures, and there was a recent report that you published back in May this year, which is actually a really excellent report. I encourage everybody to read it. But what do you see in terms of the city's plans and their commitments on climate change?
Thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the report, and I don't have to shell for it. So thank you for doing that for me. But cities have a really critical role to play. As you said, they account for roughly 70% of global emissions. 55% of the world's population lives in cities now, and that's a figure that's expected to rise to 70% by 2050. And cities have they have a dual role to play, right? They need to not only lower emissions, have ambitious targets, have plans to lower emissions, but they also need to protect the people that live in the cities from the hazards of climate change. And they have to provide essential services to the people that live within the city. So they really need to balance both of those aspects of their role to ensure that they are healthy, resilient, equitable places to live and work. Now, our recent research shows that 93% of cities, this is based on a survey of 1,000 cities globally, that 93% said that they are facing significant climate hazards that put their people and infrastructure at risk right now. So climate change is here now. It is affecting cities. It is affecting people now. The hazards that they're reporting are rainstorms, heat waves, droughts, flash surfaces, and floods. I mean, you only need to turn on the news to see examples of this every day. What we're seeing is that 74% of cities say that climate change is increasing the risks to the already vulnerable populations that they have. So climate change is this big exacerbator of the issues that already exist within cities. It's creating increased demand for public services, increased demand for healthcare, increased resource demand, and an increased incidence and prevalence of disease and illness in cities worldwide. City services are also being affected by climate change. The top one being affected right now is water supply and sanitation, but also increasingly public health, transport, emergency services, and energy services as well. But despite this, in 2020, almost half of cities, so 43%, don't yet have a plan to adapt to climate change. They don't have a plan to keep their populations safe from climate change. But I don't want to discount the tremendous progress and the tremendous momentum that we're seeing in city climate action. So I've been doing this for 10 years. We have seen a 17-fold increase in the number of cities collecting and sharing their climate disclosure publicly with the world through the CDP ICLEI system. And over 1,000 cities have joined the Race to Zero. And this commits them to set a science-based target in line with 1.5 degrees. The other thing that gives me a lot of hope is that 87% of cities are incorporating sustainability into their master planning, or they will do so in the next 2 years. And that is really the blueprint for how the city will develop. And our research has found that cities who incorporate sustainability into their master planning identify more than twice as many opportunities from addressing climate change as cities that don't. So that is a really key thing to look out for. So as I say, there is tremendous momentum. We've seen from the recently launched Net Zero Action Tracker that 90% of the world is now covered by some type of net zero pledge. And I really expect that the number of cities joining the Race to Zero and setting science-based targets will grow tremendously even over the next year.
Fantastic. And for those who don't know about the CDP, they should. Could you just say a little bit about the kind of data that you collect and how you engage with cities?
Yeah, sure. So we send a questionnaire to cities every year annually for their climate disclosure. The questionnaire covers their emissions inventory, it covers their targets, it covers their strategies, their plans, the actions that the cities are taking, but it also covers the physical hazards that the cities facing from climate change. It asks for them to do a risk and vulnerability assessment. It looks at their adaptation plans, opportunities from climate change, governance around climate change. It's a really comprehensive look of what a city is doing on climate change and water security.
Great. And let's now bring it to a specific city. So I'll turn to you, Thais, and set that in context of Copenhagen. So the plans and the aspirations you've got for decarbonization emissions and how you see your role in the city in the net zero journey.
I think firstly, the Copenhagen City Climate Plan has put in targets for the city's building, for the public buildings in the city. And that is to reduce energy consumption with 40% by 2025 compared to 2010. And obviously we're doing what we can to implement these energy efficient solutions that are known to us and that can work in our reality, while also exploring new innovative solutions through various innovation projects, such as EU-funded projects or nationally funded projects. But it's not only our own buildings that we can have a touch with. We are also aiming at inspire other building owners within the city of Copenhagen to reduce their consumption as well. So if we can set an example by implementing solutions that's viable both technologically and financially, we can set good examples for others to follow and do this via partnerships with the private building sector in the city of Copenhagen, that through city facilitated partnerships also actually. But I think we have another role as well in the city of Copenhagen. Given in a Danish context, Copenhagen City Properties is one of the largest building owners in Denmark, and especially one of the largest building owners within the city of Copenhagen itself. So a natural question to us was, how does our consumption affect the grid, both the electrical grid, but also the district heating network? And by asking this question, it opened up the door, obviously, to begin collaborating with the utility companies, with the energy suppliers to us, basically. And in terms of the district heating sector, we've had an ongoing collaboration with them for 6 to 7 or maybe even 8 years now. How can our consumption affect the efficiency of the wider grid? And this collaboration with initially the district heating sector has given us faith in that our consumption pattern can actually affect the efficiency of the entire city's grid as a whole. We are now exploring how to copy this collaboration and focus on the electricity sector as well, because obviously we have quite a big electricity consumption within the city and within the city's borders. And there will most likely be, and we are currently at the edge of, I think, unlocking this, and I know that we will be talking about this during the day. But these partnerships with the utility sector, I think is critical for building owners to understand and to begin exploring in general, because it's not producer consumer, it's a network, and just because the ownership stops at a certain installation, it doesn't mean that the efficiency of the system stops there as well. So by engaging in these partnerships, we get the the perspectives of the production sector and the transmission net as well. But also the energy producers get the perspectives from the consumer side. So how can our installations be run efficiently, both on heating and on electricity, to support the wider grid and the efficiency in the wider grid? And I think these are, as a large building owner, the next logical steps once that energy efficiency measures are, I wouldn't say all of them are implemented, but we have quite a lot of steps down that path. So what is the next big thing for a building owner to look into? And our aim and guess within the City of Copenhagen is a broader collaboration and a broader view on energy systems as a whole, instead of this old school, I would say, producer, distributor, consumer approach. Thank you.
And Thijs, you talked about the 40% energy consumption reduction. How much of that do you directly impact, and how much do you not? And what are some of the challenges around actually achieving that 40%?
Firstly, the goal is an absolute goal. So our energy consumption in 2010 was X terawatt hours. We needed to reduce that by 40%, no matter that the city is growing. We receive, I suppose, 40 buildings a year, ranging from big schools to smaller kindergartens. So our building mass is increasing while the target is set. But our path to reducing energy is, of course, to be as innovative as we can, because the target is strict and difficult to meet. And it also needs to be financially viable for us, because we are running on taxpayer money, so we cannot pursue solutions that's too expensive without any outcome.
Yeah, and Kira talked a bit about the successful cities that she sees tend to have sustainability integrated into the master plan and into kind of the DNA of the whole city and their plans. How does that work for Copenhagen City?
I think we have solved a riddle in terms of facility management. And it's actually, I think, in my humble opinion, rather ingenious that my colleague, who is charged with the refurbishment budgets and how to distribute the refurbishment budget, which is obviously fairly big for a large building owner, the same office and actually the same employee is also responsible for communicating energy efficiency results to the city hall and to the political level. So by combining refurbishment strategies with, you can call it the green agenda or energy efficiency strategies, and even put them in the same office, has, I think, accelerated our actions a lot in the previous years, because now it's not a question of fix the roof or change into to efficient lighting and LED bulbs, but it's combining the efforts. So when your lamps are old, change the whole illuminary and get an efficient solution there for the refurbishment money, instead of going to ask for money to do refurbishment or going ask for money to do energy retrofitting measures. But combining the two, in our case, has been hugely successful.
Okay, and let's now start to turn towards solutions, because that's, I think, what we're interested in. And Chris, I'm going to start with you, because you talked about the numbers of cities that you work with in E.ON, and or the potential cities that are coming. But what kind of situation do you see when you engage with the city, and what are the kind of solutions and the requirements you see from cities in terms of the net zero change that you get involved in?
Well, I think increasingly cities want to view the topic in a very, very broad way, and they need to think, right through from how power will be generated, what the renewable sources of power will be into that city, how that's going to be provided, continuously, what technologies will enable that to happen. That's a challenge very much in the sort of short term. We're very familiar with technologies such as wind and solar, but they are reliant on the elements. Looking further afield, on the horizon, maybe 10 years plus away, we see hydrogen as playing a significant role, certainly in areas or cities that are near the coast, where perhaps hydrogen will be able to be brought into the UK or Europe relatively easily. And by that, I mean fully green hydrogen. If you sort of look down then and break it down a bit further from sort of the generation to the actual sort of areas of the city that are generating emissions, you talked about buildings, which I think we said were just over 30% of the emissions are coming from buildings. And actually, you need to look sort of one step further than that underneath. Well, what's causing that level of emission from our buildings? And in the UK, we've got 30 million residential houses, and about 20 million of those homes are not yet even insulated properly. So we've had some big campaigns around loft insulation and cavity wall insulation, but there's been a lot of properties where we simply have not been able to get to yet. And there's a huge amount of external wall insulation still needing to take place in the UK. And that's going to have to happen to enable some of these other newer technologies to work efficiently. So, we hear a lot about heat pumps. They're just simply not going to work effectively in a property that isn't insulated as a start point. So there's a huge challenge there in terms of electrification of heat. I think if you go down then and look at transportation, cars and vans alone are sort of 20% of a city's emissions, and we're doing a lot of work with cities and indeed individual residential homes over, well, where will charging take place? Because I think we can all see that the vehicles are going to be ready very, very soon. They're all coming off the production lines now in quite a volume. The challenge is going to be, where's charging taking place, and have people got access to charge points? And I mean, that's fine if you live in a property which has got a large drive and the opportunity to charge at home. But if you're living in flats or if you're living in terraced housing, it just isn't as obvious exactly where that charging is going to take place. And that's going to have to be coordinated at city level for it to be done effectively and safely. I think then perhaps, cities then look at, well, how are we going to manage all this in a sort of digital and smart way? Not only how are we going to be able to balance our loads and make sure that we've got effective utilization of the grids with all the limitations that we know we have today, but more fundamentally, how are we going to engage customers in this transition and change? So, we've got a big program around smart metering, and that really is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the whole management of grids in a much more smart and digital way. Those are some of the sort of the physical requirements cities have, but you also need then to look at some of the financial challenges that exist in terms of, well, how do you get funding into this problem to create a solution? And there's been a lot of funding deployed through local authorities, things like the Local Authority Delivery Scheme, which I think has been quite effective actually, some fairly large sums of money available there for housing associations and the likes. I think it's been not as successful in terms of getting funding into individual residential properties, things like the Green Homes Grant that there was a lot of profile around. I don't think much of that money ended up being spent. And there's a lot of reasons underneath that as to why that might be, in terms of, well, how accessible is that funding for end customers? Do they really understand how to access it? And then fundamentally, do they trust the people who are going to come into their home to install these measures? What is their ability to sort of come back and manage problems and customer service? So the whole funding and investment topic is a key one. And I think, we're seeing cities such as Stockholm think, much more about circular economies and perhaps how they can connect various areas of the city up. So I got the chance to visit an energy from waste facility actually in Sweden, a place called Hogbytorp, a few weeks back, where they're burning waste. They're burning a lot of waste from the UK actually, and the off shoots of that are heat that are being provided into the city of Stockholm, but also in a local production facility in terms of manufacturing fertilizers. So there is a lot more to do there in terms of sort of sustainability and creating circular economies. I think the final thing I'd say that's sort of really encouraging in this space is we've seen certain cities take a lead on this. Probably in the UK, it's been Bristol. You know, we hear what's happening in Copenhagen and other more forward-thinking cities. Where I am taking encouragement now in the UK is, I think over 70% of our UK cities have now formally declared climate emergencies. So, you know, the compelling chase for change and the desire to do something about it is there. We've really just got to help now on the implementation and planning side of things to make this a reality.
Okay, and then just briefly, I'm interested in how do cities engage with you? Do they come with say, I need to get to this target on my emissions? Is it more fragmented? How generally do they come to you with their requirements?
A combination, actually. I mean, if I take Bristol as an example, we've been working with the City of Bristol for over 5 years now, actually, in helping them understand what, you know, decarbonising a city like Bristol might look like. What you then do get into is you get into some sort of public sector procurement processes. We've sort of touched on those. So, you know, the need to have a specification. It's quite hard sometimes to specify some of this down to the level of detail that public sector procurement might demand. So we're sort of working with cities to understand exactly how we manage that process. You know, clearly it's public money. There needs to be a huge amount of transparency around where that's spent and how that's spent. But I think there needs to be a more sort of sophisticated view of this because, you know, sort of 5 years of working on something, just simply, we don't have that kind of time anymore. So we're going to have to kind of find a way to accelerate that process and work more in partnership with cities and perhaps less through a transactional procurement type process.
And learn from each other as well. That's really struck me. So that's the cities part of the equation. I want to turn to the electrification part of the equation next. So Trygve, can you talk about the whole energy and electricity system and the changes that you see happening there, some of the issues, and a little bit about the role of technology in that change?
Sure, Phil. So we are facing a huge transition in how we produce, consume electricity. And we are starting to see some of the challenges coming from, I mean, all the good things that we're doing with renewables, but also infusing more and more EVs, heat pumps into our power systems. So the good thing about having immensely a lot of electrical or renewable production is of course it's CO2 emission neutral. But the flip side is that all the renewable productions we put into our system is non-schedulable. That means that we cannot predict a stable output from our production. And we're starting to see some of those challenges in Denmark. And on the other side, we're infusing more and more demand, so consumption demand with our electrical vehicles, with our heat pumps. So on one side, we have a more fluctuating production side, and on the other side, we have a more increased demand of electricity. And before, to stabilize the fluctuating production, we had these fast power plants that we could fire up that was running on diesel and gas, some fast fuels. But we want also to take those out of the equation because we also want to have a more sustainable and emission-free balancing muscle. So while we are taking this part of the reserve power plants out of the equation, we are missing some balancing, and that's where the cities and the consumers comes into the picture to help stabilizing the grid. So taking some numbers for Denmark, I think we are about 70% of our power productions come from wind power today. We want to increase that to 95%. So we are relying a lot on renewables. And we want to the reserve power plant, we want to basically decommission about 40% of these power plants. So, and we want to replace on the demand side about 25% of our conventional transportation vehicles with electrical vehicles. So we really have an equation where we need to put something into this equation that can help stabilize the grid and help balancing it. And that's where the cities and the consumers will have a much larger impact on helping consuming and balancing their consumption in real time according to how the wind and the sun is blowing. And I think for the first time in my many years in this energy and utilities industry, there's a huge potential of democratizing some of the central roles like balancing and congestion services back to the consumers, and also rechanneling some of the funds that we normally gave to some of the central players to provision to the consumers to act more in accordance with some of the challenges that we are facing. And the technology we have now, and in some cases, especially in the Nordics, where we have a large penetration of connected assets, we are starting to see some of these business models materialize that where the cities has a big responsibility to act as lighthouses.
Okay.
So
surely this is purely responsibility to grid companies. What have cities got to do with that whole electrification process and the problems that the grid companies solve? How do the two come together?
Yeah, and I think both Chris and Thijs gave some good examples. So as the city of Copenhagen, for instance, as a large property owner, they have taken the responsibility to basically think this electrification issues and transition issues into their refurbishment and how they can help create resilience for the network, both the distribution networks of district heating, water, electrification, into how they basically are building the control systems while they are retrofitting their buildings. So they are more ready to react on low power production in a certain hour or high power production. Last year we spent about half a billion Danish kroner just to stop wind production because we could basically not consume it when it was too windy. And in that situation, the schools of Copenhagen could benefit of just ventilating all their schools or preheating them and using that capacity instead of stalling it. And on the other hand, if there's too low wind, we can then downsize some of our consumption in short hours where there's some capacity missing in the network. So I think we're looking into a system where we need to find models where we can incentivize consumers to react more in real time. And this making consumers behave like the energy system is not a new concept, but now we just need it in much more real time that we had before.
Yeah. And just to expand just a little bit on this idea of democratization of energy, what do you mean by that?
So if we take a good example is in Denmark to balance the wind power, we have spun up of about 50-60 decentralized smaller power plants. They are all running on diesel fuels and gas in order to quickly go in and stabilize the balancing of the whole energy system. In order, while we are decommissioning these power plants, we're basically making a system, and the government came out with a strategy to do that this summer that basically has five initiatives under that, but in general it is to be able for all consumers to tap into this more centralized role of balancing the system, where if we all can act and help balance the system, we will get basically funded one-to-one what the reserve power plants would be paid to offer that service. And in that way, we're basically democratizing the roles of the central power plants and some of the incumbent players that was basically helping and adjusting this. And we're creating a much more dynamic and a simple system where everybody can chip in, but also benefit from it.
Okay, so you can start to share some of the value from beyond the utility into the buildings in the grid and the participants in the grid, and actually financially share some of those rewards across the different participants.
Yeah, so if you are refurbishing a building and you have to invest in a new building management system, isolation, as Chris said, you can then channel, if you make that grid enabled, you can basically improve your business case by offering that building to operate into the grid and act on real-time signals to lower fan speed within 10 minutes or 5 minutes. What is the need? The parameter here is that it should not conflict or influence the comfort levels or how we basically operate and use the buildings. But there's a lot of inertia in buildings and in our infrastructure that can be used for these balancing purposes. Estimation is that there's about 25% of our consumption that has so much inertia, so we can utilize and scale that consumption level up and down in real time without it having any comfort impact or impact on our operations of our assets.
And you started to talk a bit about what's happening in Copenhagen City. So Thijs, can you just build on that and talk about how that electrification idea was adopted in Copenhagen City and how that was useful to you in terms of your climate goals?
Yes, and so to start the part of the journey, to explain why we are where we are now and being able to follow these projects and pilots, as Trygve is mentioning. A good 7 years ago, we started this intense focus on energy efficiency measures. Before that, it has been classical retrofit measures, so insulate roofs, change windows, and these things. But from I would say roughly 2013 going forward, we put an emphasis on centralizing systems. So the initial project was to get all of our consumption data via smart metering into the same platform. So we've, in collaboration with our utility companies, we now have a central platform where we can log in and see the electricity, heat, and water consumption of all of our buildings down to an hourly level. And by getting that overview, obviously, we got so many more options with benchmarking and leakage control and explain strange consumption patterns and so forth. So getting the overview was one tool to address inefficient operation in buildings, but the next step was naturally to look into the management systems, the control systems of our technical installations. So due to, I think also a little bit what Chris was talking about with regards to public procurement processes, given the past 40 years, of course, the city has built a lot of its buildings in these regular procurement processes, meaning that the building management systems we had a handful of years ago were spread across so many different platforms, across so many different hostings, and across a lot of different providers. We had more than 30 building management platforms, some say even more than 40, and a vast difference in pricing, both for service and but also for hostings. So we started the task of retrofitting these management systems, sometimes getting them online. You wouldn't believe what we found. Actually, you would still have building management systems that was not connected to the internet, still working through computers in the basement of a school with, these old school computer screens and the password under the keyboard in some cases. By retrofitting this whole bit, and it was a rather expensive venture as well, but we realized that if we can eliminate 75 or even 80% of the platforms and get all of the systems online, efficient operation will be so much easier to us. So we've reduced the number of platforms from 30 or 40 to 4 central platforms now, where all of our control systems are now on these 4 different platforms. We've created building standards, so every time we procure a new building, there's a set of technical documents that's actually just an addition to the national regulations. So instead of saying you can choose freely, we say the systems we have, it's not technology specific, so we are not pointing at specific suppliers, but we say it must be connected to the internet, it must have these communication modules and so forth, to make sure that the strategies put forward have longevity as well, and we are not in the same situation in 40 years from now.
Yeah.
So centralizing platforms and centralizing the monitoring system gave us, I think, the tools needed to take the next step. Also what I was talking about initially with the collaboration with utility companies. We're now able to basically control almost all of the city's energy consuming systems centrally from the office. And one thing is like the savings you get from making sure ventilation systems are not operating during school holidays, for instance. Another parameter is we had one of our employees, he counted every time he fixed an issue online. So when the tenant in the kindergarten saying it's cold, or we can hear that the ventilation system is not running, instead of sending the service technician, he restarted the engine or opened the valve centrally. So it was more than 100 sort of saved service calls in 6 months.
Yeah.
And this all added to the business case. All of these projects were implemented as business cases in part of the city's efficiency strategies. So Copenhagen City, or the City of Copenhagen, along with probably every other city in the Western world, aims to reduce the city expenses. But by combining these agendas, energy efficiency agenda with the financial efficiency agenda, and applying for business cases saying, if we get this amount of money as a capital investment, we can reduce energy consumption by, thereby financial consumption or financial spendings by this much going forward. And this will be what's it called, yearly savings. So these measures has been, I think we would work with a 6 to 10 year payback time in some of these projects. But knowing what we know now with the missed service calls and all of that, the business case would be even better. And with this new development in terms of providing flexibility and be able to actually sell flexibility and see energy consumption as a sort of an asset that has a value, the business case for these refurbishments would be even better than that. And there's so many, I would say, side benefits as well by having, one thing is by focusing on flexibility, as Trygve mentioned, we need to make sure that we do not compromise indoor air quality levels. It should not be too cold, and it should not be too, like you cannot turn off ventilation for too long periods of times in a classroom, for instance. So we are able to tag onto agenda saying the healthy buildings as well, and healthy to be in. And this has prone us to begin installing indoor climate meters as well. So we would like to measure air humidity, temperature, and CO2 concentration levels in our rooms as well, and are currently piloting in 25 buildings. And this has multiple area of benefits as well. We can figure out exactly how much flexibility we can provide to the net, be it electricity net or the district heating net, and really run the buildings and provide the flexibility to the exact point. Okay. No guessing, no.
So we talked about electrification, bringing that together with cities and connecting individual buildings. You started to talk about actually there's quite a compelling business case to do that if you stack all this value. I just wanted to turn to Kira next, because there are some non-technical challenges as well. And Chris hinted at that a little bit in terms of some of the financial challenges. How do you make this work? And also the just the engagement of community. So when you think about the cities that you engage with and how they see their energy transition and electrification, what are some of the challenges that you see that cities need to solve?
So just to put it in context, if we look at the survey of about 1,000 cities, 10% of them said that they already have an electricity mix that's already powered by at least 70% renewable energy, so about 100 cities. And those are cities where you would, I think, expect them to be. So like in Brazil, where there's ample hydropower, in Iceland, where there's geothermal energy. But then there's a further 9% of cities that have a target to get at least 70% of their energy coming from renewable sources. And then a further about 34% that are working on decarbonizing their grid. So this is definitely a focus for cities, taking action on the energy transition. But as is the case for most cities, if you look at what percent of emissions is within their control within the city, the figures vary here between 2 to 10% of emissions within the whole city is within that city's control. And cities generally say that in order to meet their emissions reduction targets, this relies on policy outside their control. But there are, of course, things they can do. As we've heard, lead by example. This is extremely important to be able to lead by example. If the city can get over those technology hurdles, if they can make sure the right policies are in place to do this electrification and the energy efficiency retrofits, that makes it a lot easier for others to be able to follow. We've also seen that majority of cities are already working in partnership with business in order to be able to meet their goals. If we go back to this issue of control and ownership, Copenhagen is a fantastic example. I think you could also point to cities like Melbourne with their 1,200 buildings program, where they have put together a program for private owners to retrofit their buildings within the city. Cities across the globe have also told us that they need support from national governments. And the biggest one that always comes up, the first one is always access to finance. This is help to finance emissions reduction and adaptation plans to help them to tap into public and private investment and to really build that business case that is very difficult for cities to do. They're looking for support to enable and encourage innovation and to work with the national government, the regional government, utilities, energy suppliers to decarbonize the electricity grid and transport systems. So, what can they do about this? They really need to work in partnership. I've heard the high-level champion call this the decade of radical collaboration. Really that need to aggregate demand, to work with the private sector, and to work across different levels of government to set that policy. And if you look at the businesses within a city, you look at a city like London, they have a program like the London Business Climate Leaders, where there's already a group of leading businesses within the city that have their own commitments to science-based targets, that have their own commitments to 100% renewable energy. And you see leadership from Mayor Khan to work with those businesses to tackle the climate challenge together.
Okay, and so the effectively low-hanging fruit is going into buying renewable energy for the city. Do you feel that so Thijs and Trygve talked a little bit about the slightly more embedded approach about how you truly put cities and grids together and how you build an integrated approach to reducing emissions through electrification? What's your sense of how many cities have adopted that kind of approach and understand that that's what's needed?
It's very hard to say that who has got to that stage, but we have seen that a third of cities are working on it. About 70% of cities are already working with business, and energy is one of the top things that they work on. But I don't know how many cities have gotten to that really integrated approach that we're hearing from Copenhagen. I think that is really a shining example of innovation across everything that was talked about, from putting together that business case, from putting together the energy efficiency department with the retrofit department. I think there's a lot of innovation that we just heard here.
And then Chris, you talked about some of the work that you do. I mean, beyond the existing real estate, the buildings, is actually introducing new systems and new assets and engineering. Can you just give us a feel of the kind of solutions that you see cities implementing in that context, building circular economies and so on, that you get involved in?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, first of all, I think it's really important that kind of cities have a sort of coordinated approach to this and don't just sort of do it, piecemeal. Because what you really want to do is when you're going down a street or working on a set of buildings, you want to do the whole system, in one go. So you want to dig up the road once to put a district heating system in. While you're there, you want to change all the lighting and the luminaires. You want to put the EV charge points in. So, those things happen much more effectively if you do it in a coordinated way. So I think that'd be the first thing I'd say from the technology point of view. I think what that also then means is you can balance things up a bit. So if you're supplying an ice ring that needs chill, you can take that chill and offset it with heat that you're supplying to a building that you can connect up. So if you look at it from a systems point of view, it's far more effective. I mean, the other big sort of implementation challenge then is the pure sort of planning permission and the disruption you're putting into the city while you're implementing these technologies and assets. So, for example, we've just put 2 large 4 megawatt heat pumps into the City of London to supply a district heating system there, which has got over 11,000 kilometres of piping. Doing that in a city like London, you've got to do it in a planned and coordinated way, and you've got to do it once and get it right first time. So those implementation challenges and planning are really, really key as you put this sort of technology in.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got to talk a bit about the technology as well that underpinned it. So Trivia, give us a feel for the sorts of platforms, we're going to use that word, that are needed in this space and the sort of things that you see Copenhagen City doing.
So when it comes to these ecosystem and also the flexibility services, where we basically are democratizing some of the more centralized services, for instance, the ancillary services, so the balancing services, we have come much further in making it approachable, but also cheaper for the consumers to tap into that. So demand response, which is a concept where we activate or motivate a consumer to use energy in an order where the system or the system providers are asking for. It's not a new concept, but there's been 2 main barriers for getting this out in large scale, and one of things has been that it's been too costly for the consumers to be onboarded into the systems. That meant that when we talked smart homes and smart buildings for a decade now, and it's been too costly to mount all the sensors and mount all the and maintain all of these hardware systems that we're putting into the buildings. And the other thing is when we are democratizing the roles of central players or the role of balancing a system, I mean the utilities and the system operators who are basically asking for these services needed trust also to the consumers that they would actually also deliver it, so that we have a high security of our supply in our system. So there's been a mechanism missing that there was trust between the systems, also being able to rely on a mass democratization of these critical balancing services. And there we are, I mean, basically now seeing that we can exploit the maturity of connected assets, and also with I think the City of Copenhagen is a good example where they really have standardized how they refurbish their building management systems, how they prepare the building management systems to be connected to the grids. And that's such standardizations also gives the buyers of these grid services a trust that there are some reliability in what we actually have can operate. And then there are many ways of creating that and documenting that trust, but what we are using in the City of Copenhagen is basically to register those types of flexibility service deliveries on a blockchain. It could be many other things, but a blockchain is some kind of a proof that a delivery has happened, that a flexibility service has been actuated, and so that's a proof to the system. So the utilities and the system operators that they have actually received the flexibility service that the City of Copenhagen has delivered. And on the other side, the trust was also lacking, that the consumers or the cities also was compensated for that service, and we can use the same technology for proof that there's a settlement for interchanging these services when we are democratizing it.
So you start to see all the different parties being connected, all the complex different roles involved, connected in a trusted and a transparent way, and you're able to solve some of the difficult equations that everybody's mentioned in terms of optimizing energy, about built environments, and so on, and make it work for all the participants in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think that has been one of the really exciting parts of this project, has basically to be tapping in and strengthening an existing value chain. So with the City of Copenhagen, we have worked with the utilities. So the electricity providers basically are selling and provisioning electricity to the City of Copenhagen. We have worked with the City of Copenhagen, who's basically retrofitting their buildings and provisioning the buildings and their assets into the system. And then we're also collaborating with the suppliers of these systems, Siemens, Schneider, Trent, who are basically also opening up so that their systems are being enabled and open so that we can connect to them, and then also to the markets and the regulators. And I think the big learning here has been that instead of, I mean, typically intelligent city projects is 10 or 50 different players trying to interact, and what we did in the City of Copenhagen is basically to take a very slim value chain of the existing value chain, and then basically made a MVP or a fast project to basically demonstrate how this could actually work, because we are dependent on the utilities like Chris, on the cities like Thijs, on organizations like Kira, on politicians to basically approve and motivate the environment that this can happen. And there, I think the cities like Copenhagen and Stockholm and Buenos Aires and all our great cities need to act like these lighthouses, because they have the political power and also the power to attract and make people collaborate around these ecosystems.
Kira hinted that when she talked about this decade of radical collaboration that's needed. So just in the last few minutes, I'd like to open it up for just one or two questions from our very engaged audience that we have here. Are there any questions that we have from the audience that you want to put to the panel? Are there any on the GigaStream that we want to put to the panel? If you just shout out the question, Hugo, I can then repeat it for you. Go for it.
So collaboration seems to be key. The single consumer needs to lean forward, not to optimize own property. I understand they're being part of an electrical system to balance the system. What's the key focus for this collaboration, and what's going to drive it?
Good question. So we ended on collaboration. What's the key focus for this collaboration to achieve the city's goals? And what drives this? So maybe Kira, start with yourself with a view on that, put you on the spot a little bit.
So sorry, which collaboration? Like all, or?
Well, I think it's the question is really about what are the lessons learned around the kind of collaboration that's needed. What is really the essence of how to make that work?
Yeah. So in the work that we've done through the City Business Climate Alliance, and I think this is, one of the innovations that we've been seeing is this strong partnership between city government and leading businesses within the city. And I think the secret sauce of the success there is the laser focus on implementing the city's climate action plan and the realization that the climate goals that businesses have and that cities have in many ways are the same, from around 100% renewable energy, around making sure that the supply chain of the business can operate and is resilient and is protected from climate hazards. So if that collaboration is laser focused on implementing the climate action plan and those mutual goals, we have seen a lot of success, but it also takes time to build up that trust. And I'd say for cities and businesses to work in this non-commercial way.
And then Thais from Copenhagen City, your experience of trying to enable that collaboration, what's the secret sauce, as Kira put it?
I think there's a few, but if I should point at one, it's if you engage with a partnership or in a partnership, there should be defined clear goals, obviously. What are you? Make sure you know what you're working towards, and make sure that what you're working towards actually will fit the organization that you are in. In our case, to put it simply, we realized we had a problem. We did not know the consumption in our buildings, as an example. How can we solve this issue? We could not go into the market to buy anything that could solve this issue. So we needed to partner up with the relevant stakeholders to solve this issue, in a sense. This is like partnership going towards the private sector, but also the utility sector as well. So this was really one part that worked for us, that if you cannot buy the solution, partner up with developers, and to point it outwards towards other cities. If you've done something that you think is working and that you think can be scalable in other cities as well, partnership with cities, following the same formula, make sure you agree on where you need to go, and partnership around that, I think, is could be key.
Chris, from E.ON's perspective, what do you see in terms of how to make collaboration work?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the question as well, you said, does the end consumer sort of need to step forward and sort of play a role in it? I think they do, but I think before that, there's a couple of things that perhaps we as an industry need to do, and we need to communicate more clearly to end customers, exactly what's happening. So, we have customers move into properties who are on district heating systems, and they don't realize that they're on a district heating system, and they don't realize that they're locked in. If you read the press in the UK, switching is the answer to all ills. Well, guess what? You can't switch when you're on a district heating system. You're on it. But what we've got to do is we've got to make some of these end technologies much more affordable for customers to engage in, because a £5,000 heat pump and £10,000 worth of installation costs just isn't something that's going to be accessible to the vast majority of what we refer to as the able to pay market. They're not able to pay that amount of money on a heating system. So we've got to bring the cost down. We've got to engage. It's got to be a much more joined up, intelligent debate. There's got to be a climate and a market created where it's not just environmental sustainability, but it's got to be financially sustainable as well.
Absolutely. And Trygve, do you have a brief comment on how to make collaboration work?
I think it's very much about communication. It's to have a strong purpose that the stakeholders or the ecosystem can reflect themselves into, and then it's a strong incentive model, and I think the incentive model has been one of the things that the City of Copenhagen has been, driving a lot, and we are taking that now a step further, because I think without the incentive model, also as you refer to, Chris, is that if there's not a financial viable, view or objective with doing retrofitting your buildings, become a part of the flexibility market. I mean, it's really, really hard to drive it. Then it will be only on heart and philosophy, and that won't make it. So we are really we work initially with some high hypotheses about the business case and how the payback time and what we could achieve, and now we're extending that and building a much more simplified financial model or incentive model or investment model, where we can basically very fast qualify if a building or a city or a corporation, what they can get out of participating in this. And I think there's a lot of, and the complexity is that there's so many pools of value that are siloed today. So the challenge is to make a more, combined incentive models. On one side, we have the renovation wave that is addressing some of the challenges that you talked about, Chris, that it's basically only 1% of our building mass which is energy efficient. So post-COVID, I mean, the EU is posting a lot of financials into the system in order for building owners and property owners to renovate their buildings. On the other side, we are democratizing some of the roles of the utilities, the power plants, to the consumers. And then there are some local investment schemes, but it's very hard to combine these different pools of value, and nobody has really taken that step. And I think we're trying to find a model how to visualize and predict what is the value of retrofitting, what is the value of retrofitting plus making it grid enabled and deliver flexibility, so that we can create a strong purpose, but also a strong incentive model to invest in participating.
And I think that's a good question on which to draw our session to a close. I hope you got a sense of the equation that we're trying to solve here. On the face of it, it's a pretty simple thing. We're trying to help cities get to net zero and reduce emissions. I hope we managed to unpack some of the complexities that are needed, and we kind of ended on this message of this decade of radical collaboration enabled through cities and their laser focus on their climate action plan, thinking about how they collaborate with different parties for a whole systems picture, thinking about communicating with individual customers and industry, thinking about the business case for all different parties, including the individual consumers itself, and overall having a strong purpose in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So as ever, we're here to be contacted if you'd like to find about more. Firstly, just to thank the panelists for coming here today. I hope you got a sense of the kind of very broad or sort of diverse range of input and expertise that the team brings. So I thank you very much for your preparation and your contribution to the panel here today at COP26. Thank you in particular to the audience who is being streamed on GigaStream. So this is all available after the event as well. And we appreciate the very lively audience that we have here today in Glasgow, Caledonian University. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.